Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some malicious compliance stories and our first story of the day is by Simple Pigeon. I worked ahead of schedule, but I guess I don't work for you anymore. This is a story one of my coworkers told me while we were chatting in the lab. He's a recent hire after getting laid off from one of the big three car companies, an unfortunately very common history for someone to have in my area. However, he was cheered up immensely because of how badly they'd screwed themselves by letting him go. He told me how the company had him specialize in a very technical software project, being the only guy who knew how to use the requisite tools and being the de facto expert on how the code was structured and how it worked. No one else felt the need to get up to speed or brush up on it because he handled it all. He had so much free time being put on no other assignments that he ended up working way ahead of schedule and finishing not only the software, but the security audits, reports, and all sorts of documentation that would have been necessary once the project was finalized. He kept these pre-produced deliverables on his personal directory so that he could give them ready in a flash when the company asked for them. I'm sure you can see where this is going. Well, a car company's favorite pastime is layoffs, and they decided he was no longer necessary and canned him. In retrospect, their unwillingness to get him started on any other project was a red flag. Knowing exactly what kind of hot water they'd be in without him, he happily deactivated his employee account and subsequently deleted everything on his personal drive. The remaining project team members rapidly discovered how screwed they were when they tried to provide a status on his software and realized none of them knew anything about how it worked, how finished it was, or how to continue working on it. No one had bothered to have it explained while he was still there. One of his buddies on the team called him up a few days later, begging him to help him out and just let them have the files he'd completed ahead of time. My coworker felt conflicted because he had no real grudge against the employees who were stuck in this situation, but obviously no one had those files anymore since he was no longer an employee. He basically told his friend that the company had dug its own grave and he couldn't help in any way besides giving him some tips off the top of his head from what he remembered. He told me he somewhat regretted helping them out on his own time, but ultimately just hoped management learned their lesson. And because I've read similar stories on this sub, I told him that's when you call back and give them your quote for freelance work. To be fair, that's actually when you call them back and give them your quote for freelance work. If you left the company stranded because they fired you and you were the only one who knew how to work the operations, would you charge them a pretty penny to come back and fix it up for them and teach them how to use it? Or would you do it for a more reasonable rate? Or would you outright refuse when they did you so dirty like that? Let me know in the comments down below. This next story is by Wirenut. Violate written safety procedures so we don't lose $24 million? Nope. This happened about 15 years ago at a large manufacturing plant at which I was one of 120 industrial electricians, and this happened in the department in which I was primarily responsible. These jobs pay upwards of $30 an hour, and I was making $34 an hour at the time. This was my career for decades before I retired last year. I now get a pension from them and fully paid healthcare. This wasn't just a run-of-the-mill job, this was something to take very, very seriously. Our safety administrator retired, so a new guy started and decided to audit all of the lockout-tagout procedures. Lotto everywhere in the facility. This place employed 4,000 people and was over 1.5 million square feet, so it was a massive undertaking. Many of the machines in my department were large multi-station transfer machines where the part goes into several drilling/milling/tapping/boring operations and are transferred to the next station in turn between operations. Basically, the operator loads a raw part into it, and once it comes back around to him or her, it's finished. The cycle time for this machine was about 1 minute and was a key part in expensive final products, costing upwards of $50,000 each. It was made clear to me that the company lost $50,000 for every minute the machine was idle, as a way of instilling urgency as if I needed it. As I said, these machines had multiple stations that each had its own specialized operation to accomplish, all automatically. This, of course, involved many switches, buttons, computers, motors, encoders, drives, all of which are used in industrial automation and sequencing. Usually, when an electrical part broke on a particular station, I would shut down the electrical power for that one station to perform my repairs and replacements. All was good, and I could usually perform just about any repair within 15 minutes or less. The management people usually didn't even know anything unusual happened, as the operators were on piecework and would often skip a break to make up the shortfall. Until the new lotto procedures were released for those machines. The new procedure required anyone performing repairs to lotto every station for every kind of energy potential. This includes electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic, and gravity. Since this was a union facility, this required the services of an electrician, a plumber, a mechanic, and a millwright. It also required something like 38 individual locks to be applied by the aforementioned skilled tradespersons. It also required about 4 to 8 hours of work to complete this task. Keep in mind, these were huge machines that would take up an area the size of a gymnasium and cost tens of millions of dollars to buy. When I saw the new lotto procedure, I grabbed my boss and the production supervisor and showed it to them and explained in detail why this was ridiculous, unnecessary, and unworkable. My boss got the safety administrator and we all had a conference, and I was told basically that that's the way it is. The very next day, a type of switch called a proximity switch failed on one of these machines. Normally a 5 to 10 minute repair. Cue malicious compliance. I dutifully informed the production supervisor that he lost his machine for the rest of the shift and half of the following shift. He chuckled and said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "Dude, I'm dead serious." I got my boss, told him I needed 38 lotto locks, a plumber, a mechanic, and a millwright. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. Remember the conversation we had yesterday? It just got real. "Show me why you need 38 locks." Okay, and I brought him to the machine, pulled the 10-page illustrated, notated, laminated lotto procedure off the machine, and counted where each and every lock needs to go. 38. And I need the other tradesmen here as well. I figure the machine will be rendered safe by the end of the shift. Matt can do the repair, and another 4 hours to remove the locks and set the machine up to be ready to run by their lunchtime. Also, keep in mind that there will be cribbing to make the gravity potential safe, and most locks need a special kind of hardware to apply to valves and other devices to be able to function correctly. "Just fix it the way you usually fix it," my boss told me. "Put it in writing," I said. "Just fix the dang thing," was his unhelpful reply. "I think you need to give it to me in writing, or you need to get my union rep here. Those are your 2 choices. I'm not gonna get fired over this." About this time, several men in suits and ties showed up to find out what the problem is, called into action by the production supervisor I previously mentioned. He and I had a great working relationship, and he knew what was going down, so he started making phone calls when I let him know his machine was broke. To make a long story short, an hour-long meeting was held which included my union rep, after which I was provided written permission to make the repairs as I always had. The new safety administrator had been properly scolded and learned a lesson. Management learned to just let Wirenut do his job, and the machine was running 10 minutes after I received the paper. That was a loss of $3.5 million according to their math. It would have been $24 million lost if I had to follow their procedures to the letter. All new procedures were put in place with much input from my colleagues and me. This was a test case for how the other 500 skilled tradespeople were going to be proceeding with the new safety guy, as they had also been provided with new, ridiculous lotto procedures. It just turned out that I was the first to have to implement them. It's nice to want to do everything as safely and by the book as possible, but in reality, when you deal with machines so big, so complex, and make so much money in such a short amount of time, you kind of just can't. OP did absolutely the right thing by demanding getting it in writing, because Lord knows, OP would have gotten in crap if they did it the way they usually did by this safety administrator, and nobody wants to get fired over doing things what should have been the right way. OP definitely was not going to go down in this situation, having the blame put on them. Our next story is by Bales the Ace here. Overtime. That's right, overtime. Here's another tale that's not mine, but I love asking people about their best malicious compliance stories, and this is one my cousin told me. He worked at an injection molding company as a machine operator, and one of his colleagues was named Danny. He was a runner. He would show up early and start up the machines before day shift arrived. He would make sure that each machine had enough raw materials in boxes for the completed products, that sort of thing. He would pull the full skids of completed product and take them to the warehouse and wrap the skids for shipments. He'd load the trucks and accept the deliveries of raw materials. He knew everyone on the factory floor and was pretty much a pivot man for the operation. Let's call the company Can-Co, since it was located in Ontario, Canada. They got bought out by an American company, Amco, and Amco set up a new guy to be facility manager. Before they got bought out in 2019, Can-Co was struggling. Danny was an arrive early/stay late kind of guy, so he offered to bank his overtime and Can-Co accepted. He got it in writing. At the end of 2019, he asked to be paid out for his accumulated overtime, which was substantial. In January 2020, the facility manager called him into the office and offered him a $6,000 annual bump in pay and increased benefits if he accepted a salaried position for 44 hours a week. Danny took it. As 2020 went on, Danny was working lots of hours and submitted an Excel sheet every week with the hours he'd actually worked. There was a column that showed hours in excess, where he entered the hours in excess of 44 for the week. In the autumn of 2020, Danny approached the facility manager and asked if he wanted Danny to take his accumulated overtime as time off or to be paid out. The Amco company handbook stated that all PTO needed to be used up by the end of the year or it would be lost. The facility manager chuckled and replied, "Your salary. You don't get overtime. That's why I put you on salary." "That's not right, boss. I get overtime after 44 hours. "No, you don't. That's Amco company policy." "Yes, I do. That's Ontario labor law." Danny handed him a printout of the relevant page from the Ontario government website. The facility manager said he would look into it, but didn't. Danny pestered him, and finally, fed up, he fired off an email to the facility manager, the plant manager, Can-Co HR, and Amco HR as well. Eventually, he got called into a meeting with the plant manager, the facility manager, and HR. You should understand that HR was a bit of a Karen. Nobody really liked her, but she was a blabbermouth. The company tried everything to get out of paying the overtime. Danny asked, "Do I have the authority to enter into contracts on behalf of the company?" "No." "Do I have the authority to assign work to my colleagues or discipline them?" "No." "Then I am not a manager or a supervisor, and under Ontario labor law, these are the only people exempt from overtime." "Oh, and see that total? You can multiply that by 1.5, so for every hour overtime I worked, you either pay me an hour and a half or give me an hour and a half off with pay." After the meeting, the facility manager was furious. His little scheme to get free work out of Danny didn't play, and now he looked really bad in front of his boss. "Danny, beginning right now, you don't work another minute of overtime without my permission. You got that?" "Okay," Danny replied. "Let me put that in an email." He did, and the facility manager confirmed it in a reply. Danny was arriving at 5:30 a.m., more than an hour ahead of the production team, in order to unlock the doors, turn on the lights, and warm up the machines. These machines melt little beads of plastic and squirt them into molds, so they take about 45 minutes to an hour to warm up. So the next day, at 2:30, Danny left and shut off his phone. There was an afternoon shift that started at 3 p.m. and a meeting with the day shift foreman, the afternoon shift foreman, the facility manager, and Danny. And there was a discussion of any issues and production targets for the shift. Since Danny wasn't there and he had the tally sheets, the afternoon shift had no idea what they were expected to produce for the shift. The next day, Danny came in early as usual, and when the facility manager arrived, he demanded to know why Danny didn't attend the meeting. Danny explained that his shift was over and he went home since he wasn't allowed overtime. That's why he shut off his phone too. He can't do company work on his off hours. That's overtime. The facility manager said that Danny's attendance at the meeting was mandatory. So Danny suggested that the only way for that to happen would be to adjust his working hours. The facility manager then changed his hours to 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., effective immediately, and put it in an email at Danny's insistence. Later that day, there was a delivery that arrived at 3 p.m. and Danny wasn't there to unload it, so they had to turn it away and have them return in the morning. The next day, Danny arrives at 8 a.m., as instructed, only to be met by a furious day shift foreman. When the foreman arrived, the entire production staff was in the parking lot as the doors were locked. He opened them up, let them in, and then had to wait around for almost an hour producing nothing as the heating coils on the machines came up to temperature. The facility manager arrived in the middle of this bollocking, and Danny simply pointed at him and said, "He changed my hours to an 8 a.m. start. Didn't he tell you?" This turned the wrath onto the facility manager, who now had to take responsibility for a 12 to 15% drop in production for the day. There were also occasional Saturdays when the company fell behind. Only Danny wouldn't be there to bring the machine's raw materials or take away finished product. That would turn into a cluster truck too. So the facility manager gave in and gave Danny blanket authorization to work any overtime required. The raise he got to bump the salary ended up boosting his pay by $2.75 an hour, but the only downside was that Danny couldn't bank it. It was paid out each check. The kicker? Remember Karen, the blabbermouth from HR? Somehow, and nobody knows exactly how, word got around the office that anyone who wasn't a manager was entitled to OT, and they all started submitting timesheets that included it. I mean, to be fair, if I was Danny and they were trying to do me in like that, I'd go around and tell everybody, hey, if you're working overtime and you're not a manager or a supervisor, you're entitled to overtime. If I'm Danny and I'm working at this place, I'm running all around, I'm doing all these tasks, I'm not working for free there. You can't take advantage of me like that. So I'm totally with Danny here. And our final story of the day is by Killabrew. Breaks are at 12, 2, and 5 every day, no exceptions. So I just read about someone's experience with lunchtimes, so I will share mine at a very large worldwide retail company. I worked overnights stocking at this place, and every day the meat and produce would show up at any given time. The only person who ever had to unload and put away the 10 to 15 pallets was me. So my wife worked at the same store as I, and we liked to go to break together. One good thing about a crap job. I was a smoker and she was not, so we would break at different times than most, so she wouldn't have to be in a room with 10 people blowing smoke in her face. At some point, some bitter crap bag went crying about it to the manager, who then calls me into his office and tells me breaks are at 12, 2, and 5, period. I tried to explain what and why, but was interrupted and told go to work. So now flash forward just a few weeks when I hear on the PA, OP to the back for a truck at 11:55. So I stroll on back and the support was there and opened the door and started to walk away when I said, "Don't go far, break is in about a minute. If you want this done, you're gonna do it." He then tells me, "No, I'll do it before I go anywhere." That pissed me off instantly. So now in a rage, I kindly explained, "Dave, the overnight manager, your boss," said with finger quotes, told me break is at 12, 2, and 5, no exceptions. Then I started walking to the break room as he is now on his walkie-talkie snitching on me. As I enter the break room, I hear on the PA, "OP, unload that before your break." And guess who it was? Yep, Dave sure as crap now wanted his cake and to eat it too. I calmly put my smoke down and walk to a phone where I then page out, "Dave, I'm sorry, but breaks are at 12, 2, and 5 without exceptions, and what you want is the definition of an exception. So there is not a thing I can do for you. Now please stop interrupting my break, it is against policy to do so." So now having dropped a turd in this punch bowl, I know what's next and I leave the break room and start walking towards Dave's office. And I'll be darned, not 10 seconds later, "OP, come to my office." I round the corner before he even hangs up the phone and say, "What's up, big guy? You call for me?" He just looks at me and says, "Dude, what the freak was that?" I reply, "You made the rule. I'm just doing what you said. No exceptions doesn't mean when it's in Dave's favor, okay, we will do that. No exceptions means freak you, go at 12, 2, and 5. Now go to work." So if you will excuse me, I got crap to do. He pushes the door shut as I turn to leave, and I think, here we go, I'm gonna have to beat this dude's butt. I was wrong though, because he says, "Fine, you win. Break whenever the heck you want to, but you better never leave a truck unloaded again." After all that, I stop and look him square in the eyes and say, "See, Dave, was it that freaking hard for you to grasp? If you want crap done around here, who gives a freak if the person doing it uses his left or his right hand if it gets done? Don't micromanage me, and we will never have another problem." As long as he was the manager, we never had another crossword. I'm just surprised that OP's strong enough to carry those steel balls around like that. I mean, OP must have not been too afraid of losing their job being able to just walk up to the manager and talk to them like that. I mean, I know OP was in the right, but man, a lot of times people would just fire you right away anyways for the way you were talking. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.